The biggest, grandest ship in the world, and it's unsinkable. Indy's impressed. The Titanic, a fabulous new ocean liner, has everything. Swimming pools, Turkish baths, French cafes, everything that is, but enough lifeboats for all the passengers. Indy's got his hands full. First, he has to keep an eye on his former tutor, Miss Seymour. She's inherited a fortune, and Indy suspects the retired colonel who's courting her is a shark. Indy's also promised to help hide a beautiful Irish stowaway. But what's worse, he's overheard a mysterious conversation in German about blowing up the ship. Luckily, there's a man of authority on board Indy can trust. Or can he? Is Indy traveling first class to disaster? Young Indiana Jones and the Titanic adventure.
Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video, I wanted to cover another of the Young Indiana Jones books. I was able to actually get a copy of book 9, the next book in the series I hadn't got to read, which is Titanic Adventure. This was written again by Les Martin, who sort of traded back and forth with William McKay on the previous 8 books that I covered in a video. This is continuing in the same tradition, but it's actually after a gap. The book started in 1990, ran through 1991, and that's when we got the Young Indy Chronicles TV series, and the books were done separately from that. So I guess there was a bit of back and forth about should this Random House series continue? How should they try and tie it into the series? Should they even bother with that, or should they even continue? So this book didn't come out until 1993 and is actually under the Bullseye imprint. I don't know if you'll be able to see that logo there. And of course, it's on the back, but otherwise the printing and design is the exact same format. But from book 9 to the end of the series, they seem to have only had one print run, and that's why book 9 onwards are exceptionally difficult to find and usually go for quite expensive prices. I was actually lucky to find this on Etsy for rather cheap, plus I had a coupon, so it was nice. I was able to get book 9 and continue where I left off, essentially. For those who haven't heard of these books before or haven't seen my video on being able to read the previous 8, again, this was a short-lived series that actually was stretched out quite a bit. So it started in 1990, ran to about 1995 into 1996, and the books were sort of staggered because there was this sort of gap between 91 and 93 where it was like, I guess they were trying to see what the series was going to do. These books have a sort of loose continuity of their own. There are some recurring characters, and it is Young Indy about the sort of, I guess it's technically supposed to be about the age setting around the Last Crusade opening Indy. So essentially imagine the River Phoenix Indy from the opening of Last Crusade if he had gotten to have some more adventures in that sort of tone. And what's great about these books is that they avoid a lot of the pitfalls I think the TV series ran into of trying to shoehorn in that sort of edutainment factor. And when Indy encounters famous individuals or historical events that are notable events of the past, it doesn't feel shoehorned in like it does in the series. When you read these books, everything feels a lot more natural, and it's not happening all the time. There's also a focus on history in these books that feels better integrated. So while there is some dramatic license taken with the actual historical events and settings here and there, for the most part, it's relatively accurate. And each book takes the time to have an ending section with a glossary of terms because they were designed for young readers, but also to try and get kids to engage with history. And they have the author clearly state where they actually took some dramatic license. And then it usually includes a list of books for kids to go check out in their library for more information. So it's actually, I think, quite helpful and a much better approach and a more entertaining approach, actually, than the TV series, ironically enough. Now, these books were designed for children. The reading age put on the actual books, it has a reading level of about 4th or 5th grade, and the volumes themselves are quite slim. But that would, of course, lead an adult reader or an indie fan to think that they're, not going to be much to write home about. But their slim volume and childhood reading level, I think, is very deceptive because, like the Scholastic books done around the time of Crystal Skull, these are all perfectly fully fledged Indiana Jones adventures. And again, as much as I like certain aspects of the Chronicles TV series, I think these Random House books are far better in each book that I've read so far. I've read the first 9 now. Each one feels like its own self-contained Indiana Jones adventure. Each one feels like it could very easily be adapted into a television show, even now. They are exceptionally well done. They have great amounts of character, and they also build the world of Indiana Jones. And every character that appears, who reappears from the films, they feel very much in keeping with their film counterparts. Nothing feels out of place. And the way these books are designed, they do fit within the Indy canon. So if you view what happened in the Chronicles as canon, well, these books sort of happen around elements of the Chronicles TV series. So they actually kind of nicely fold into the overall Indy chronology, even though they started long before there ever was a TV series. When these books started, there were only the 3 films and the novelizations, plus the Marvel comics that are considered their own separate continuity. So, of course, in Titanic Adventure, young Indy actually finds himself on the famous Titanic. You would think that this would be a very simple story and maybe a little bit on the nose to have Indy just happening to be there on the Titanic, and when, of course, we have the famous sinking. That in and of itself, plus it being the first book after the TV series had started, would definitely lead you to believe that perhaps the books were now going to be heavily influenced by the approach of the TV series. And I do think there was a little bit of that, because there is one major concession, because here we have the Miss Seymour character, who's the older lady and tutor of young Indy in the Chronicles TV series, particularly for the young 7 to 9-year-old Indy episodes, and she is a recurring character throughout the series. Well, her inclusion here immediately links the book, obviously, to the Young Indy series, and I think that was the sort of olive branch of these books, sort of saying, okay, we're going to acknowledge the Young Indy Chronicles, so it doesn't seem out of place to have a Young Indy book series that has nothing to do with the Young Indy TV series. But the character is nicely folded in and actually is used as the means of which to get young Indy onto the Titanic, so everything flows perfectly. It doesn't feel out of place. This is, again, a very short, in terms of page count and thin volume, and a children's book, but just to sort of go through some of the plot elements, this is a short children's book that starts with young Indy meeting Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Indy is, of course, a giant fanboy and tries to not fanboy out meeting Sherlock Holmes' creator. And it's a really wonderfully, nicely written little scene between young Indiana Jones and Conan Doyle, making references to all of Conan Doyle's works and interests. But then the Miss Seymour character has inherited a fortune and decides that she and Indy are going to go back to America, but take the new hyped Titanic and go in style, essentially. So then we get young Indy on the Titanic. Then Miss Seymour is essentially being possibly fleeced for her newfound wealth by a nefarious supposed colonel. So Indy is then trying to prevent her from getting swindled. Then, if that was not enough for a small book, young Indy overhears a strange conversation, actually in German, that Indy realizes is actually sounds like people plotting to blow up the ship or sabotage it in some way. So then that sets Indy off on a path of investigation, which also involves spying work and going between all the different class levels of the Titanic and sort of sneaking his way in and out of the third class, and also giving the contrast between, obviously, the luxury of first class living on the Titanic and the experience of sailing at the time against the third class and the lower berths experience, plus a great deal of information and exposition about the Titanic and its design without ever feeling forced, because Indy is actually going around trying to gather information, essentially doing detective work on his own that actually does turn into spy work at points. If that were not enough, we have a love interest in this book named Molly, who is an Irish stowaway that Indy manages to keep hidden and assist, but she is not what she seems and has ties to not only the suffragette movement, but also the labor unions, and is also an IRA member. So this book concludes with having elements and operatives of both the IRA and the would-be German saboteurs, with a plot to blow up the Titanic. All the while the Titanic is heading towards its predestined end that, of course, the reader will know going in. So all of this is crammed into this short little children's book. Again, you can see how thin this is. And the font of these is on the larger side. So again, they're not particularly long. All of that is crammed in here. And it makes the experience a fun read, just like the previous 8. So this is just as good as the past 8 books, even though, it's just Young Indy on the Titanic. There's enough stuff. There's enough plots for at least several books crammed in here. And it's so well done and nicely executed that it makes the book feel fresh, even though you know that at some point the Titanic's going to hit the iceberg and it's just going to be the sinking of the ship sequence that we've seen time and time again. So it's essential to have all those other plot threads. And they're meshed so well that this is yet another really great Indy story that fits the character, fits the world, fits the timeline, is really entertaining, is actually involving the character in real history, but again, having a nice amount of dramatic license to make the story feel fresh, because it's not pretending to be an edutainment experience like the television series did. So it avoids all the pitfalls of the Chronicles series while actually getting young Indy onto the Titanic, and it's just a fun little adventure story. Again, all of this material is crammed into a little kid's book. So this is just as good as the past 8, and it's fascinating to see how they put an olive branch out to the Chronicles TV series to tie this series into that, so everything could be in unison, so kids could pick up these if they saw the TV series and not be completely lost. But otherwise, it is in the exact same design. The spine is exactly the same design, so they go together on the shelf. Again, the only difference is this now has the bullseye imprint. And as you can see, they've also started advertising the handful of novels that were actually adapted from Young Indy Chronicles TV series episodes. So I think it was a wise idea to relaunch these after a short hiatus with that sort of direct linkage. But otherwise, the font and text and the whole layout is exactly the same as the previous 8. Again, the book concludes with an actual historical note highlighting the actual historical events and where the author took some dramatic license. And there's another section actually highlighting specific books on the subjects and historical events and various individuals highlighted in each of these. So kids could read these Young Indy books and then actually go back to their library and get the actual reference materials to learn more. So again, it's that sense of actually getting kids to engage with the historical material and then want to know more on their own instead of it being force-fed to them. And of course, gotta show the Lucasfilm Fan Club membership little mail away page, which of course gives me a lot of nostalgia for when you'd see stuff like this in kids' books. The artwork on the cover is also pretty good, keeping in the same style. There's a great amount of detail. It's a nice action sequence of course, the Titanic going down. We have the Young Indy font and logo. My only qualm with this, as on some of the previous books, as I talked about before, if you look, it's usually the faces of the characters in particular. Young Indy looks pretty good, although he's usually drawn to look a little bit younger than the actual timeline of these books would have him being. Again, he should be around the age of the River Phoenix Indy, but the various book covers usually have him looking more like he's 12 or 13-ish. But of course, that's the audience these were going for. But the books kind of jump around in the timeline, so I'm okay with that. But do keep in mind that the Young Indy in these books is probably more in most of them probably closer to like 15, 16. But again, they kind of jump around in time. And of course, this is 1912. So yeah, it makes sense why they kind of skewed it to look a bit more younger. But the only issue on this cover is that the side characters, and I believe that's supposed to be Molly, they look a little bit more cartoonish in the actual facial details. But other than that, I think this is a really lovely cover with a great amount of color and detail. And of course, the actual composition is lovely. And it's, of course, the scene you're going to put on this is the sinking of the Titanic. So those are my thoughts on Book 9 of the Young Indiana Jones Random House series. This is just as good as the first 8 books, and it's a shame that not only are these books so little known and even less read, but they're also long out of print and very difficult to obtain. Because they're kids' books and there's not much information about them and they're very slim, I kind of wrote them off years ago thinking that, oh, well, maybe I'll read some someday, but I don't know if I'll ever find them or if they're worth tracking down. Well, believe me, they are. The problem is the later on in the series you go, the more difficult, more expensive they get. And I never thought I would be able to look at books 9 through 15, for example, but I did manage to find this book, so I felt it was worthy to cover in video form because these books are a real surprise. And again, like the Scholastic indie books done in 2008, these are some of the best Indiana Jones fiction there is. And each one, despite having the Young Indy version of the character, managed to perfectly recapture the spirit of the original 3 films. And I would honestly say these Random House books, the 2 Scholastic books, and the best of the Bantam novels are the best original Indiana Jones stories since the original trilogy of films. I think all of these combined are far better than the official films we've gotten since, and they basically stand alongside the Fate of Atlantis storyline for the classic game and the best of, say, the Marvel and Dark Horse comics as the whole pinnacle of the expanded Indiana Jones universe. So if you've never read these and you're an indie fan, you're in for a treat, but they are very difficult to track down. You can do like I did and probably manage to find the first 8 at a decent price if you're patient, but even those are getting harder to track down. But once you get to Titanic Adventure and try to get the last few books to complete the series, it gets very difficult. So be prepared to be saving a search on eBay and seeing some absurd sale listings. I know there's one seller that keeps listing one of them over and over for like $666, and it's like, no, what are you doing? So it'll probably be a while before I do another video, but again, I managed to find Titanic Adventure not long after covering the other 8, so that's why I decided to cover it in a separate video, because each of these books has been such a treat to read. So again, even though they're obscure children's volumes from Random House that are long out of print and difficult to track down and very slim, don't let that deter you. This is some of the best Indiana Jones storytelling since the original trilogy of films. These are wonderful adventures, and for my money, they're actually better than the Chronicles TV series. So as always, I hope my babblings about our favorite archaeologist and the world of Indiana Jones expanded universe fiction in the printed medium has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I do strongly recommend this Random House series if you can find any. Basically, read whatever you can get your hands on, but do keep in mind there is a sort of loose continuity to some of the books, so it is better to read them in order if you can, or at least relative order. But you're basically going to be scouring eBay and Amazon used listings, but especially your local used bookstore. So please, as always, do go and support your local independent bookstore wherever possible by hopefully being able to find some Young Indie copies. Keep cracking the whip, keep reading print books, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching.